All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming here on this very rainy morning. Well, you know, probably rainy for Brisbane, not that rainy for us who have travelled up from Melbourne to be here. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we are gathered on today is unceded land and pay my respects to the custodians of these land and waters, the Turrbal and Yagera people. We recognise First Nations peoples as the first artists and storytellers and keepers of sacred knowledge and stories. And we want to extend that recognition and respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are here today with us or watching on the live stream. My name is Amy. I'm Stella's Education Officer. So, just a little bit about the Stella Prize for anybody who hasn't seen the Stella Green before. We were founded in 2012 by a team of powerhouse women in literature who were fed up with the status quo and sought to change it themselves. We provide financial support to authors, help booksellers stock and promote prize-listed titles, and we ensure that all Australians, regardless of where they live, can engage with women's and non-binary literature. You can find out more about us on our website. We have a lot of free programs, both online and in-person ones, across the country. And we've just released our new education resource, the Online Literature Club, which is about 30 pages of study plans and resources that teachers and students can download for free. And you can have your own book club in your school with Stella listed titles. So welcome to Story Sessions. We're really excited to be here in Brisbane. This is only my second time here in Brisbane, and it's a beautiful city, and it's really great to be able to plant some Stella seeds here so we can keep coming back and keep throwing free events for you. So the lineup has slightly changed this morning because Mirandy has been sick. So in our second session with Benjamin Law, we are having Chris Keane. You can learn a bit more about Chris Keane and their books during that session at 11:30. Right now from 10 to 11, we have Lee Lai, who is being interviewed by Sophie G. So Canon Lee's book just won the Stella Prize last night, so we're very excited to have you here today to talk to these high schoolers. And we've got some free book packs, so at the end of the second session, we want to make sure every teacher gets a book pack to take these books home to their library and have a read of if you haven't read them already. So just a quick thank you to our education sponsors and partners, Hanson Little Foundation, Christina Campbell Pretty AM and Family, the WEA Foundation, VATE, the Victorian Association of the Teaching of English, and Griffith University. So those books that are on your chairs today for you to take home are a collection of stories from students from Griffith University for their capstone subjects. So thanks, Griffith, for those. Some more reading for you. And I just want to introduce our moderator for this session, Sophie G. So Sophie G is a literature professor at the University of Sydney and Princeton. And I'm going to hand it over to Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Oh, whoa, that was noisy. Let's try that. That's sounding much better. So it's such a pleasure to be with you. And before we get going, I'd love to just actually, I'd like to do two things. One is move my chair so that I'm not partially obscured for this side of the room. So, Lee, do you mind if we just move the table a little bit that way? Well done, not spilling the water. Thank you. And moving this to here. Before we really get going, I would love to know a tiny bit about you guys. So, which schools are you from? It looks like you're from two different schools. Can someone tell me what school you guys are from? And is that nearby? In the Moreton Bay region. Cool. And I don't know Brisbane at all, really. And where are you guys from? Okay. And is that? I think I heard someone talking about that last night. That's really nearby, isn't it? Yeah. Great. And are those both state schools? Yes. Yeah? Great. And something's happening down the back. Yes. You're from a different school. So that's 3 in total. And is that a nearby school as well? 4. Oh, wow. Nice. And what year are you all in? Year 9? I'm hearing a lot of 9. I've got a 10 down the back there. Any advance on 10? 12. I'm hearing a 12. Okay. So everyone's really in the trenches. That's lovely. I feel like this is absolutely the right room and the right book for us to be talking about. So I'm going to introduce Lee formally in 1 second, or informally actually, but using words. Before I do, though, just to acknowledge the land that we're on, we've said that it's unceded land, of which the Turrbal and Yugara people have been custodians for millennia. I also realized, to my embarrassment but also joy, that I had not realized that the word Meanjin is the place of blue water lilies. And I only learnt that this morning, although the word Meanjin, of course, is very familiar to me. And I thought about this being the place of blue water lilies, and it filled me, as I'm sure it fills you, with a kind of wonder and grief and joy, and also a sense of the extraordinary fruitfulness of place and the ways in which First Nations all over the world tell stories, hold place, and hold communities through place. And so I wanted us just to have a moment to reflect on that, particularly going into Lee's book, which is very much a book, I think, about place and the way that we feel place and body and time through story. So that is the way I would like to acknowledge country this morning, by really calling out the place of blue water lilies. So Leela is an Australian cartoonist, and she lives in, and she has helped me with this pronunciation, Jojaje. Is that right? Which is the colonial, the place now colonially known as Montreal in Canada. So Lee and I have in common that we're both people who've lived in North America for a very long time, and we are back in Australia in a kind of a way as visitors. Lee has been lavishly decorated with international awards. She was named as the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35 for her first graphic novel, Stone Fruit, which has also won many, many awards. And she has had cartoons and comics in some of the most important publications worldwide, the New Yorker magazine, which many of you I think will have read, McSweeney's, which is a wonderful literary magazine, the New York Times, Granta, and the Museum of Modern Art's magazine. So these are all really important publications internationally. And her second graphic novel, Canon, which is what we're speaking about today, has just won the Stella Prize. It's also been shortlisted for many international awards. It's a finalist for the Carol Shields Prize for Fiction, which is a very, very prestigious fiction prize. And it was chosen as one of the New York Times best books of 2025, which is an extraordinary accolade that very few authors anywhere can claim. So Lee is a very modest and committed artist, and would never, I think, show off about these decorations that she has received, but they're quite extraordinary that we have this person in the room with us today who has written this very extraordinary and beautiful graphic novel. So I'm going to give you a very short roadmap of how we're going to do things today, so you know what's coming. So I'm going to ask Lee some sort of broad questions about the story that she's telling in Canon. I'm going to guess that not all of you have had a chance to read Canon. Has anyone been able to read Canon? That's totally fine. Oh, one person. That's wonderful. That's what we thought. So we're going to have some questions about sort of literally what happens in Canon, and then we're going to pivot to talking about the technique of graphic novels. Why graphic novel? Why not just write it as prose or poetry or something else? And for that, Lee has prepared some slides, so you'll get a flavour of the way that Canon looks and feels as we turn the pages. And we're going to actually get into a little bit of the technical work of composing a graphic novel. And then it's your turn. So for the last 15 minutes of our hour together, I'm going to invite all of you guys to ask any questions that you'd like to. So I hope that sounds good. Welcome, Lee. It's really lovely to be talking to you.
Pleasure.
So let's start by talking about the heroine of this novel, Cannon. Cannon is kind of a low-key, dependable, sort of easygoing, seemingly easygoing young woman. And I wonder, first of all, tell us about her name, and maybe tell us a little bit about her character, how you imagined her character, because it's a cute nickname, but I was also thinking about a character called Cannon has a kind of force and latent power. So will you tell us a bit about Cannon?
She is, for one thing, I write fiction. I think because I write characters that are somewhat close sometimes to my lived experience, people assume that it is memoir or autobiography. It's not. I couldn't. I'm too embarrassed to write memoir ever, I think. And so she's an entirely fictional character, but the way that I like to build fictional characters is by taking things that are familiar to either my own experience or experiences in my loved ones' lives, and then fictionalizing that and distilling that into something where I'm exploring a certain idea. And so the idea with Cannon was exploring someone who is very service-oriented, who is very dependable, who is very reliable, and who manages to be those ways partly because she is taking some of the more intense feelings that she could experience and putting them on the side or deprioritizing the time that she would need to discover what's going on there. And so the reason her name is Cannon is because she has a very intimate friendship with her best friend who she met in high school, called Trish, who is kind of a study in opposites. She's very impulsive and spontaneous and emotional and chatty. And Cannon's actual name is Lucy Chan. And there was a joke that Trish made about her when they were younger, where she's like called her Loose Cannon, like Lucy Loose Cannon, because she is the opposite of a loose cannon. And then slowly the nickname just became Cannon, and that just stuck. And because Cannon works in a kitchen with a bunch of boys, kitchens are good places for nicknames and create that sense of intimacy and camaraderie. And so Cannon just became this universal name for her. And I think everybody in the book appreciates the irony of the name because she is so non-confrontational and stoic. But the point of the book is that there is a limitation on how long you can be that way if life is antagonizing you. And maybe that is not the most advisable way to be all of the time. And so that is, the story is looking at the moment when she is starting to grapple with that.
Yeah. And it has a fabulous, before the story gets going as a whole, it has this fabulous, totally enticing sort of flash forward to the moment where Cannon is going to live up to her name, which is just this great intro to the book because it's so energetic and you feel what's coming for us, I think, in this story. So because you guys haven't read the book, so, you know, one of the things that's so beautiful about this novel is the way that Cannon and Trish are companions all the way through the story. And they are, as Lee has just explained, they're in many ways they're temperamental opposites. And as the story develops, what we realise is that they are very intimately linked, not only because of their histories, but also because their temperaments, their personalities start to inform one another. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that they meet in high school, and this is a time where people are really exploring, you know, who am I? Am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? Am I the noisy one? Am I friends with the person I'm friends with because they're like me or because they're unlike me? And I think I have a 16-year-old who is in year 10 and she's really experimenting with these questions of friendship. She's actually always asking, should I change my friends? And in some ways this novel, I think, is an answer to that question. So, which is no. Or sometimes. So I wanted to ask you a question about thinking about Cannon as a kind of coming of age graphic novel. So we see flashbacks to Lucy's, to Cannon's high school years, and which are in Lennoxville. Now, is Lennoxville what is Lennoxville?
Lennoxville is this tiny town in the Eastern Townships, which is a collection of towns just outside of Montreal. It's about 2 hours drive outside of Montreal, and I picked Lennoxville because it's kind of a lower to middle class Anglophone pocket. And Anglophone just means that they're English speaking, which in Quebec is a French speaking province in Canada. And so I knew I couldn't write, I'm not French, and my French is terrible. And so I knew if I wanted to set the story in Montreal, I was dealing with the language politics of the place, which is that it's a heavily bilingual place. And so if they were to exist in a small town in Quebec, there is only a few small towns that are English speaking. And so that's why I picked that place.
So it's it's a small town, and in some ways Trish and Canon are outsiders because they're the only Anglophone, so English-speaking Chinese lesbians. They've come out at that time? Yeah, lesbians in their town. So they're sort of weirdos, they're sort of outsiders, and yet they have this really deep, intimate bond with one another. And another thing that is fabulous about this book are these pop-up moments of French where, I think the people in the novel are probably bilingual, but they're also fusing French with great little sort of English interpolations. It's very funny and playful in this way. So back to the coming of age question. What for you were you trying to kind of think about in terms of the way a coming of age narrative looks? So, there are lots of coming of age stories, right? It's a very conventional genre. And it's quite a common genre for graphic novel. I was thinking about some graphic novels I really love, Fun Home, Alison Bechdel. I was thinking about Dragon Hoops. Do you know that one? Oh, it's fabulous. By Jean Yang, an Asian American cartoonist. These tell these stories of coming of age. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how the graphic narrative allows us to tell coming of age stories.
Oh, good question. I mean, I'm always perplexed by the idea of what exactly is coming of age, right? Because we associate it with adolescence often.
Yep.
And for sure, there is all these moments. I mean, in my own adolescence, there was so many moments of, figuring out identity elements, figuring out like your kid, these things are like these questions, these big questions of friendship and how that relates to the self and how that relates to how you're going forth into your adulthood. And so it's kind of an obvious choice for coming of age. But since having traversed adolescence and then my 20s and now I'm in my 30s, I'm like, it doesn't stop. Actually, it just keeps going. Well, I'm talking. My mum is here, and I've been talking to her about this, and she's still coming of age.
Yes,
like you never stop, especially if you're someone who is inclined to be, taking in a lot from your surroundings and questioning things and questioning yourself. Like, what an honor to be continuously coming of age until we die.
Totally,
actually, that's my preference.
Yes.
The idea of this plateau of adulthood where you just know things, well, you're meant to know things at least. That's horrible to me.
Yes.
And I remember when I was younger, so I'm really going off script here, but whatever.
Please, go off script.
I'll come bring back to graphic novels at some point, I promise. But I remember being in high school, and I came out as queer in high school. And then towards the end of high school, me and my best friend at the time, when we found each other in that kind of scarcity-based way, we both realized we were trans. And that was like, it was hard to come out, and then it was hard to come out again. And I was like, fuck, if I can just figure this stuff out, then I can do life.
Yep.
If I can just come out and then figure it out, and then I know my identities, and then I can just do my life and be my adult self. And then I came out and, built my community of trans people and racialized people and queer people and like politicized people, and was like, whoa, now I have to figure out all this other stuff.
Totally.
Like that wasn't the key to figuring out my life. It was just another step, another push.
Totally.
And so I wanted to write a story about the next push, which is, like arguably nothing to do with identity. I think me and all my friends who are of various, XYZ marginalized identities are so not in the period of our lives where we're talking about that anymore.
Yeah.
And thank God. Like it's great to do that, and then it's also great to move on and talk about other things. And so it wasn't really about that kind of coming of age, which is maybe more the conventional sense of coming of age is the search for identity. it was like, oh, well, just how do we maintain our long relationships when there is resentments, and how do we be of service to people when we are ourselves resentful?
Yes.
Or how do we persist in these moments when, like, life, the day-to-day dirt of life is antagonizing us?
Yes.
And how do we protect ourselves in our relationships? That is a coming of age, and that never stops, is
Totally.
my impression.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And again, one of the really resonant choices that you made in writing the story is that this is, in some ways, it's a perfect piece of narrative arcing, right? It has a sort of flash forward, then we go back in time, we find out what the story is, why is Canon the way she is. We have these kind of crises with Trish, her friend, and the place she works, which I'm about to ask you about. And then we have this very exciting, very dramatic climax, and then the whole thing tapers. What's so clever about this story, though, is that there's a sense of ongoing, unresolved questioning. And so you've tied the narrative off, but you've also let the narrative keep going far beyond the last frame. We can imagine the narrative projecting far beyond the last frame of the book. And so that might be something for you guys to think about as you think about narrative, as you think about how you write critically about the way stories work. Is the story asking us to think of the end as a really definitive endpoint, or is it asking us to think about endings as these kind of stopping points or pausing moments where a new story will start or something will totally change?
Yeah, and I think, so there's a term in the kind of genre that I work in. Often my work is called slice of life. Is that a term used in like literature in general?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
I've
used
never
a lot
it,
in
but I'm going to
comics.
use it. Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like there's something a bit cringe about it in relation to comics because
Totally.
there's certain associations.
Yeah.
But it's, to me, the appealing element of that term is that it is a slice. And ideally, if I'm doing my job correctly, you want that to feel like it's just one moment, and that these characters lived before this book, and these characters will continue to live after this book. And I don't like fully resolved endings for that reason. Back to your question before about the graphic novels, particularly enabling coming of age and maybe slice of life also. I mean, I don't have anything to compare to because I haven't written prose much. That I don't have a lot of experience. This is just what I do.
Yes.
But I think the pleasure in cartooning for me is that there's all these details you can use, and the details can be very subtle. It can be like a weird little mug that person always uses that has a freaky little cat on it or something.
Yeah.
And I think prose can do that too, and probably there's many prose authors that can really attest to the ways in which you can build the intimacy of someone's life and identity and lived experience into the words themselves. But I find the images so handy for that. Like there is so much in someone's body language and the quirks of someone's body language that you can instill into a character and their behavior in relation to one another in an image without feeling like you're pushing it onto the reader. Like it can be just there and you can notice it or not notice it, and the story will hold either way. And I love that kind of environmental atmospheric detail that builds that sense of intimacy without having to tell someone that is why you're putting it in there.
100%. And that is one of the things that's so gorgeously rendered in this book. So that is actually a perfect segue into the slideshow. If we could cue that, please. And while we do, I'm going to ask you one more general question, which is that one of the major settings, not the only setting, but one of the major settings and the sort of centerpiece of the story is the restaurant, the restaurant kitchen, where Canon works, and a little bit the restaurant itself, the front of house. What called you to a restaurant?
I worked in them for many
me
years.
Too.
I like many people, when I was a teenager, I started working in hospitality. I think just because my sister did, you know, and also I thought I would like it. It was helpful. I was extremely shy. It helped me to have social skills, and I am a somewhat urgent and frenetic person who likes to be busy. And so it was great being in a super stimulating environment like that. And I like food, and they feed you, so that's cool. And so that was my side job, or my main job, I guess, until I quit that in 2016. When I tried to start freelancing completely for comics.
Wow.
Cool. And have not been back since, and I miss it terribly, actually. It's so badly paid in Canada that every now and then I think about going back, and I'm like, can I work for $15 an hour again? Probably not. But I like that was one of the moments where, because I love details so much, I wanted to pick um, an environment that I knew how to put those details in. And there's so many elements about working in kitchens that is such a pleasure to write about. You know, like the kinds of camaraderie and antagonism and fun that exists between the workers, and the weird dynamics with the boss. The boss in this book is awful.
Awful, but
He's
so brilliantly awful. Like,
Well,
he's not like slam you over the head awful. He's just like a total creeper.
slimy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it kind of, he's great.
I like to not write villains. Like I generally try and write my characters quite compassionately, and even if they're pretty awful and they're behaving terribly, I like to try and write in a way that doesn't condemn them as a bad person. I had a really nice time letting go of that with this boss. He's just bad. He's just a bad man. We don't like him. There's nothing redeemable, I think, about him. And I just like kind of shut my eyes, and trust fell into that pleasure.
This is a word that I tell my children never to use, but he's a loser. He's awful, but thinks the world of himself. Okay, so let's get into the detail. And okay, great. So it's on, the slides are moving. So tell us about this juxtaposition that a graphic novelist or a comic artist is always working with between the words and the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, this particular slide, there's a challenge in comics and also incredible potential in comics at the same time with what is called the gutter. So that is the space between the panels, that little white bar between the panels. And that is this wonderful moment of kind of inference or suggestibility where you can trust your reader, or kind of maybe manipulate your reader to draw meaning that isn't necessarily directly given. And so you can kind of, like for example, in this slide, and maybe it'll move or maybe it won't, but there's all these different scenes happening. She's doing different things at different times, and the thing that is holding the panels together, ideally, is the kind of audio track that trails through the page. And so there's many things that I'm trying to do at the same time, and I'm using the fact that these panels are separate and distinct from one another, but moving along to try and communicate those. Like, it's hard in comics to show that time is passing, and ideally you want to do it in not annoying ways, like drawing a clock ticking or a leaf falling from a tree. Like there's ways of doing that are quite cliche, and they do work, but it's a bit boring. And so ideally there's other ways to show that time is passing, that maybe a week is passing, as well as trying to ratchet up a certain vibe. And so this montage goes on for several pages, and it's all these moments of her kind of, it's just like the grind of her life in this moment. And you can tell that there's like these resentments are building, and the coil is tightening a little bit, and there's unease. And I wanted to create a sense of unease to juxtapose, you know, the meditation soothing track that's going on at the same time. And ideally it's a bit funny.
Yeah, it's very funny.
Well, great, thanks. But it just kind of gives you all these opportunities to show completely disparate elements, potentially, of someone's life, and let the reader do the work to kind of stitch together their own interpretation. And in my opinion, good graphic storytelling is not a pairing of text and images where the image just illustrate what the text is doing. Ideally, they're doing something different to one another, and they're working together to create some third mysterious element that is neither. You know?
And actually, I'm nervous the slide's going to change, but if you look at the two lower panels, the one on the left with the TV screen, we're obviously seeing it through the character's eyes, right? Because they can see their knees, or we're probably seeing it through Cannon's eyes. She can see her feet, her foot, her knee. I think it's her foot. Is it her foot? Yeah. And then on the panel on your right, we see we're sudden. It's a different perspective, right? Because we can see Trish and Cannon's face. So we're no longer in one of their minds. The perspective is shifted, but you didn't have to say that. You can represent it through the visual idiom of the panel. I guess we could wait till the slide. Oh, here's a new one. Okay, so this is a great example. So this is a standalone panel. It also introduces one of the great characters, or the great character ensembles of this story, which are the Blackbirds. Tell us about the Blackbirds, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about a standalone panel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, essentially this story is, in some ways, kind of a psychological portrait of this main character, Canon. And one of the ways that I like to write my comics is that they're only in dialogue. So there's no narrative prose in my work, it's just dialogue. And I realized maybe halfway through writing that I'd given myself a real challenge by trying to do a portrait of someone who is not very talkative, like who doesn't externalize her feelings through her words. That's the whole point. She doesn't talk about herself in that way. And I only have dialogue to illustrate that with. And so I realized that I needed some other kinds of visual motifs to illustrate maybe what was going on for her, or suggest what was going on for her. I tried not to be heavy-handed with it. And the birds were, I can't remember where the idea came from. I think there's been a few different references in texts and also amongst friends about the sense of either the concept of intuition being an animal and being a bird, and the bird being far away from you or like right with you, and that proximity being really helpful. And I loved that as a concept.
That's great.
And then also the idea of birds being a moment of disorientation. It's like, oh my God, I feel like I have a bag of birds inside me. Like this like sense of unease, because birds are kind of scary, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And a bit ominous. And they often
they're dinosaurs.
They are dinosaurs, and they have like unknowable little eyes.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of mystery to them, and I think that is reflected a lot in like a history of symbolism around birds. Like they have different meanings of different cultures. In a lot of Eastern cultures, they represent unity and togetherness, and they're good omens.
Yep.
And then in a lot of Western cultures, they are signs of death.
That's right.
Or bad luck and evil, especially if they're black.
Yep.
And so magpies specifically have a useful duality of symbolism in that way, and so that was something that was fun to play with too.
Yeah.
For me, they are an embodiment of anger and rage within, and then also of intuition.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. On that note, a friend of mine who is a professor as well is writing a book about blackbirds at the moment, and she's writing about them in Indigenous cultures and in Western cultures, and how that all comes together in North America actually, and how blackbirds in Indigenous cultures they can be troublemakers, they can be tricksters, and they can sow the seeds of dissent and dark thoughts, but they don't have that malevolent, like overdetermined symbolic capacity for evil that they do. Like think about the Bible, for example, and the dove versus the blackbird in kind of Western thinking. So I loved the way you worked with that. Let's talk about the single panel. So what does a single panel give a cartoonist?
I love a single panel.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes from a lazy perspective, a single panel is great because you don't have to draw 4 different drawings on the same page. But so I work mostly with a 4 grid, as you saw before. It's just always 4 grids. And part of that is just because I want the page to be legible and easy to navigate. I know a lot of cartoonists who do incredible, complex paneling decisions that are really cool and bring their own element to storytelling. But for me, I love it when you're kind of just racing through it. It enables a certain kinds of like flow with the 4 panels, and also my work is relatively detailed, and if you put more panels on the page, it's just a lot visually. So I try and keep it relatively simple, but there's something that's nice about doing the same thing all the time that means it sets you up well to break that formula. So if you create an expectation and a formula of having the same 4 grid all of the time, and then you suddenly give a single panel, it changes the reader's experience of turning the page. Because you get kind of used to turning the page, and then all of a sudden there's this moment. And to me, that moment is kind of putting a hand on the reader's shoulder and saying, stop for a second.
Yeah.
Slow down, take it in.
Yeah.
This is a moment to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And so there's a few single panels, and I mean, I feel like hopefully the mood kind of speaks for itself. But the times when I would stop on a single panel, it's either when someone's saying a real moment, like it's a real one-liner that I want the reader to really notice, or it's just a certain look, or experience of someone's body or an environment, or it's an expositional setup to be like, okay, now we're in this location. But either way, there's a function to the single panel, and I always need to make sure that I'm doing it on purpose. Like, what am I setting up with this panel, with this page?
And it's sort of all of the above in that panel, isn't it? Because, you know, we usually learn about how narrative conveys setting in words, but here the setting's conveyed so vividly by this static scene that we're looking at. And there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of mess, there's a lot of work to be done. You haven't had to put words on any of that. It's just sitting there. She's in quite a confined space, but I think that's an open window in the corner of the room. So we're also seeing what it would be like to move out of confinement. I think that for me, the image of the birds like clustering in this small space, it's very agitating. And you've also put the two birds on the windowsill so that we have this sense of their possible escape or flight or movement, even though movement's not depicted. So there's just so much going on.
There's also something like, I love thinking about attention a lot, which is probably an influence of my mother. But I notice in a lot of comics, in my opinion, not to throw other cartoons under the bus too much, but I think there's often a problem in comics where people overdraw. It's like, okay, I drew this background once. I have to keep drawing this background in every panel. And I'm like, no. Like, I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm not actually thinking about the fact that there's this incredible ceiling. And if I was drawing this, I wouldn't want to draw that ceiling for every panel that we're having this conversation. But there might be a moment, maybe, if like I'm pausing, where I look up and I'm like, whoa, I'm in this really cool building. And that in a moment of storytelling might be an interesting moment to zoom out for a second and be like, okay, actually is the character of me having a moment of being like, holy hell, I'm sitting in this beautiful building talking to this audience. That is a good moment to draw the entire room, because I want to indicate to the reader that maybe the character is having a moment of realizing what's happening around them. Otherwise, I think the influence of drawing the background every time, it kind of nullifies it. It takes the impact away. And
that's unbelievably interesting. I've never heard someone say that before, and I just want to kind of everyone stop and listen to what I've gone into full teacher mode here, to what Lee's saying, because, you know, again, in narrative, in prose narrative, and actually I think in poetry, we talk about voice. I mean, how do you know what the perspective is in any given piece of writing? It's usually voice, it's point of view, it's it might be tone, maybe it's a little bit the mood, but we know the perspective because of the voice and the point of view. And you're offering, and this is just such an incredibly resonant point, that when you're drawing as well as telling the story in words, the choices you make about the drawing are the comic equivalent to perspective or point of view. And you spoke before, and I loved this, about how difficult it is to convey time changing in graphic narrative. And I wonder whether those choices about what to include and what not to include in terms of background helps with that time problem. Because if you notice the ceiling at one moment but not another, time has changed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just another element of control and also of restriction. And like, ultimately, if I wanted to, I could put, because some comics do this, you can put a little box in the corner and you say 1 week later. And that's all you have to do. And sometimes I love having conversations with other cartoonists about this, because we love thinking, it's hard, drawing is hard, writing is hard. And so sometimes you think you're conveying a certain mood, a certain idea, a certain twist in the plot, and then you give it to someone to read and they're like, I don't know what's going on here. Sometimes it's like, I can't even tell the difference between the characters. You've drawn them too similar.
Right.
Like there is a lot of pressure on the drawing to really carry a lot of weight narratively.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just can't draw it. It's too hard.
Yeah.
And so you have to make decisions around legibility all of the time. It's like, how easy is it going to be to communicate this? And at the same time as wanting to be clever and wanting to convey all these ideas through the medium, there is also just pressure to make it accessible and to not confuse the reader too much, right? Because you want the thing to land.
Totally.
And so I feel like there's all these decisions that have to be made around, do I complicate this by doing a whole montage where time is passing, or do I just cut it to be economical and then have a little box saying 3 months later?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to invite you guys to ask questions in 1 second. I have a million more questions, so if you don't have any, that's totally fine with me. But one last question on that. So whenever I've spoken to comic artists or graphic novelists, the question has come up about the way that comic books as a genre, they start out, I believe this is correct, as a pretty commercial, pretty accessible, like popular genre. And part of the kind of page turning and the quick snatch of the imagery and all that stuff is intended to kind of make it an easy read. And one of the things that's really great about canon and other graphic novels by very sophisticated storytellers is that they're not merely commercial. It's not like, you know, Superman, but it is like Superman. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about balancing that, the sensibility of the comic as something that's really about access, about the invitation to be in the story in a pretty easy way and so on, with trying to tell a story that, you know, frankly is pretty weird a lot of the time. Yeah.
So I come from a niche in comics. Like, comics is a niche in itself in like the publishing world, I guess. But I exist in a sub niche, I guess, that is, I guess you would call it alternative comics.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are stories mostly about humans. They're more, I suppose, what would be called literary comics.
Yeah.
And weird stories. And so you don't see a lot of superheroes. You don't see a lot of, like, I don't know, anthropomorphic animals. You tend to see people having a bit of a weird emotional time and going about their
looking
regular
like
lives.
People.
Looking like people.
One of the great things about the drawings is that people have body fat, they have hair.
Yeah,
in
they're just
places
normal
where you don't
people.
want to have hair and so on.
Or you do.
Yeah, or you do. Like, that's where hair is. Yeah, but not in
Exactly.
comics. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that niche is such a small niche of books in general that everyone in it is kind of just in it for the absolute passion of it. It's kind of like poetry.
Yeah.
Like people are really not in it for the money. They're in it for a big, specific creative desire, and we are constantly feeding off of each other in the inspiration of each other's work. And we're kind of defining the genre as we go, because this is only a niche that has existed for maybe 30 years, 40 years, arguably. And certain artists have kind of defined that genre and made it possible for other people to do it. But this is all to say, people are very experimental in their niche. The wonderful part of being in a niche is there's no restrictions. There's no, big moneyed publisher breathing down your neck saying you have to respect this formula, like there is in romance novels, for example. That's a very restrictive formula.
Totally.
Or even bestseller novels. They have a very specific formula attached to them, the kinds that you get in airports.
Yep.
And you're really beholden to your editor, and you are not beholden in this niche.
Yeah.
And so that's great. And so you get to really think and make decisions about what elements you want to use, how weird do you want to get, what kind of weird do you want to get.
Yeah.
And so this has been something, as I develop my own practice, I think particularly over the last 10 years, but arguably longer, like what elements do I want to be weird with, and what elements do I want to be more conventional with for the sake of accessibility.
Yeah.
And I think I decided relatively early on that in many ways my priority was the writing.
Yeah.
Like, the story is the element that is so fascinating and fun to me, and that's the part that I want to push myself on and experiment with more. And the cartooning is a joy. I love drawing, and I always will. But I want it to be relatively straightforward. I want to keep the drawing relatively simple and easy to see what's going on. And so most of the challenges that I set myself are around, developing character and developing my dialogue skills and developing my editing skills so that I can tell the story in interesting ways and like land the concepts that I'm trying to land emotionally or thematically. And the cartooning just has to enable that. But then I also have peers who, their creative priority is make the most interesting panels you've ever seen that make you think and feel in a different way. That prompts a different kind of emotionality. Like, I think a good example is Chris Ware.
Oh, yeah.
He's iconic, he's been iconic since the 90s, and he does the most incredible panel layouts. Like, he'll do a huge page that's like this big, and every panel is the inside of a different building. Like, it's like an apartment building. So you get to see all these different humans existing in their little rooms, and that's the story. Yeah. And that's incredible. When you think about that from a storytelling perspective, that is so sophisticated and beautiful.
It really is.
And also, not my thing. I can look at that and respect it and be like, you're a master. And that is not the kind of story I want to tell. I want to tell a story about a woman losing her cool.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to do that, I can't get too fancy
Yeah.
about some elements of the comics. Maybe that's a different project.
Mhm.
This one is about this thing.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. I need to cut myself off because this has now sort of devolved into a coffee. We're having a coffee in front of people. So, questions, please. Has anyone got something that they would love to ask Lee? Yes, please, in the stripes. Now, how are we going to do it? Try shouting and then. Well, you should I'm going to relinquish my mic. I'm good at shouting.
I imagine like it took a while to finish the story. Did it develop as you were making it? And if so, like how?
Yeah, great question. It developed a lot. One of the best and worst things about comics is that they take a really long time, right? Like you got to draw it, you got to write it, and then you draw it. And this took 4 years. And part of that 4 years was just because I have to pay the bills, and so I'd do other jobs. I'd put it down, and I'd take a job that gave me a bunch of money, and so I'd do that for 6 months or something. But even without that, I probably would have taken maybe 3 years or 2 years. And if you're writing a story that is, an emotional journey with your own ideas about how the characters should behave and how they should resolve their problems or how they should learn from the things, I'm learning too. And I started writing this in 2019, and my intention at the time was to write a long-term queer friendship that was being kind of ground down and thrown into question. The relevancy of the friendship was thrown into question. And my first draft, they didn't. I'm spoiling it. I'm going to spoil it. I'm sorry, guys. I was much more cynical at the time about what I wanted to do in the story. I did not have hope for the friends and their friendship at the same point. I wanted to just kind of tear at the relationship, and then the pandemic hit, and we couldn't see our friends, we couldn't hang out with our friends, and all of our friendships started really suffering, and it became really no fun at all to write a story about a friendship and strife in the same way. And so I found myself really working it differently and going back and changing a lot of things to incorporate my need for a bit more optimism and my need to see friendships really surviving in their indispensability. And I think that happens for all authors. It's particularly awful to go through that process with comics because it means redrawing. I threw out like 80 pages from this book, or redrew them, or reworked them, or cut scenes. And the faster I got at drawing, the more I felt I wanted to learn how to do that, because it's a wonderful thing to let life influence your work as it's happening.
How long have you been drawing comics? Because I know a lot of artists have been drawing like ever since they were a child, but like how long have you been drawing?
My mom wants to answer that one. I think she's going to say forever. 2. Oh, Mom. That's cute.
Probably people can't hear. Lee's mum is saying at the age of 2, and hair stood up on the back of her neck, Lee's mum's neck, because there was something going on there. Yeah.
I drew a lot. And it was a form of joy and escapism and fun. I made a lot of extremely rude stories when I was younger, and I thought all I wanted to do was make rude stories for children. I was reading a lot of Captain Underpants. And somewhere along the way, it got serious. Like, I wrote a story, I think, about a queen who couldn't stop flashing everybody, and she was, like, shunned from the court because she refused to wear underwear, and she was, like, flashing everyone all the time. But somewhere along the way, I got more serious, and I've been doing comics more intentionally, like, trying to make it more of a job since I think I was, like, 16, 17. There is quite a lot of sex in this book. Because the last book I wrote was quite sad. It's very serious and sad. And I wanted to have a bit more fun with this one. And arguably, it's still quite serious and sad. But there is, I hope, a lot more jokes and a lot more sex and silliness. Yeah.
Not just with this book, but with any other book that you've written, have you ever found yourself struggling to like keep on writing it, or you've like lost inspiration, and how have you like defeated that and overcome that kind of feeling of giving up?
Yeah, great question. All the time. I live in a place of not liking my work, and I say that as someone who's extremely grateful for the recognition that I've gotten, and I know I have made it work for me. You know, I know I've got a career that can keep going, but I have a very strict and intense inner critic that just is always there, being like, "This is bad. This is bad. This is bad." And I have built a relationship with that part of myself, because at first I thought it would just go away. I thought that if I made something that I liked enough, or that was good enough, that I got my skills to a point where it was just really good, then that feeling would go away. But it just adapts as your skills increase. It just also, it's like the birds. And so I had to hit a point a few years ago of being like, I have to build a better relationship with this part of myself, because it's not just going to go away. And so my rules now is like, you know, you can be in the car, but you can't drive, you know, and the thing that has helped me shift away from trying to appease that beast, you know, that just wants to tell me that my work is rubbish, is reinvesting not in the idea of the work being good, but in the idea of me loving the process. And I love making comics. I love writing stories. I love drawing stories. And I feel incredibly lucky to do this. And so obviously I hope the work turns out good, but that is out of my hands. I can do my best, and that is all I can do. And I think investing in the love and the commitment to the process itself has been very healthy for me in getting that like troll to sit in the back of the car and be like, okay, the one that drives is the one that like is committed and loves this process. And you know, a big part of it is also financial necessity. Like this is my job, and I have to make money to pay the bills and to pay my rent. I'm a great tenant. I love to pay the rent. And so, you know, there's a lot of arguments for and against making your passion your day job. It's not for everybody. Some people love the creative freedom that comes from having the bills paid elsewhere and then getting to do their, you know, really exploratory creative work on the side. I think for me, I really like it being my paid job because it pushes me out of the preciousness that I feel sometimes when I'm like, oh God, what if it's not good? Maybe I'm having a bad day. I can't draw. I won't draw. And just be like, just draw. You know, just do it. Maybe certain days are not the days where I'm going to do big character work on my script, because my brain's not there. But I mean, the good thing about comics and the bad thing about comics is there's just so much labor involved. And so I kind of just have to suck it up and do it. And I'm going to have bad days, and maybe I redraw those bad days. But the process of just building the habit of doing it despite, and not waiting for the moment when I believe in my work or waiting for the moment for the muse to strike, has been really good for me. Just build it as a devotion.
That's a great question and a great answer. I think we've got time for one more question, please.
What's been your favorite story, either published or not published, that you've created?
That I've created? Oh, I had started like this entire list in my head opened up of other people's stories. I don't have a favorite. I think. Okay, no, I mean, I wrote one recently that I quite like. It's quite short, and that's new for me. I have mostly written long stuff, and long stuff, you can pick out more flaws. When you've got a whole book of problems to look at, that troll part of myself can get really busy. And so this story is like 16 pages, that's it. And it's tight, and I wrote it recently, and I know I won't like it in like 6 months because my standards will shift and then I won't like it. But I get this nice little moment when I've learned something from something I've just done. Like I did something I didn't do before, and I get to make something and be like, oh, cool, I just learned something from this. I just learned how to do something that I was trying to do in a really short period of time, and I get to feel thrilled with myself and thrilled with the project. And then that lesson normalizes. Like I get used to it, I take it for granted, and then I start being critical of the work, and then the timeline moves on. But in this moment, the thing that I like the most is the thing that I made like a couple of months ago. And I think me liking the work is recognizing that I've learned something and that I am very pleased with the thing that I've just learned.
These have been amazing questions. We're going to wrap, but just a PS to that great question and to what you just said. So when Lee gave her acceptance speech last night for the Stella Prize, one of the things she spoke about is the way that in writing canon she was also trying to balance her deep commitment to and care for being an activist, being an organizer of social protest, and looking at the world as it really is and trying to make change happen. And the fear that being an artist is a stepping back from that, not a stepping into it. And one of the things you said that I particularly loved for both personal and more conceptual reasons is that it's very often the case that these communities of artists, of queer folk, of racial minorities, people who in some ways are living at the edges or on the margins of what we might think of as kind of mainstream capitalist corporate society. These are the pockets of life where extraordinary courage often arises. And, you know, so speaking personally, my favorite thing about the stories that you tell is finding funny, creative, moving, ordinary, beautiful ways to tell these stories of how courage has a place in this world where we are struggling with the possibility of disaster and trying to hold this idea of human courage and human strength. And I think it's something that you are truly doing. And it's just really amazing.
Thanks, Sophie.
Yeah. So congratulations again. Thank you, everyone, for those great questions.
Okay, we're going to get started, everyone. Hello, hello. My name is Benjamin Law. I'm stoked to be here with you all. I'm just going to do a pop quiz before we start. How many of you are here because you love to read? Okay, that's most of you. That's good. That's encouraging. How many of you are here because you like to write? Yeah, okay. How many of you are here because your school forced you to be here? Oh, you're here by choice, which is excellent, which is really, really great. My name is Benjamin Law. I'm one of the judges of this year's Stella Prize, and I'm really stoked to be here with you on the beautiful, ancient, sacred lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. You probably know this by now, but here on this continent, First Nations people have been writing stories, sharing stories for tens of thousands of years. And First Nations people here are actually the oldest continuing civilization the planet has ever known, the oldest storytellers, the first storytellers. So when you think about that, I think it's a very humbling fact, especially for those of us who are not Indigenous, that we get to continue sharing stories here on what is and what will always be Aboriginal land. We're here to celebrate the Stella Prize today and to talk about the Stella Prize. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about the Stella because you might know what the prize is, but you might not know actually how it was founded. And I think it's a really cool story because it shows, I think it's a demonstration of people noticing something is wrong and then doing something about it. So back in 2011, there was a panel of Australian writers, and it was all women. And this was at a Melbourne bookshop, and the day was International Women's Day. And these writers, their names are Christine Gordon, Monica Dux, Jo Case, Louise Swin, Rebecca Stafford, Sophie Cunningham. They were talking about how few female writers were in the books pages of newspapers at the time. You know, like if you open a newspaper or go onto the website, there will be a book section. And at the time, most of the books reviewed were by men, and most of the reviewers were men as well. And they were really angry because there were so many books out there by Australian women, there were so many books out there by Australian non-binary people, and there were so many reviewers out there who weren't getting their reviews published as well. So they were pretty livid. And why they were also angry is because that very night, the shortlist of the Miles Franklin Prize, the Miles Franklin Prize is the most prestigious literary prize in Australia. Like if you win the Miles Franklin, it's a really big deal. It's like you've won the Olympics of writing books in Australia. That night the shortlist was announced, and the shortlist was all men. And it wasn't the first time that it had happened. And in the history of the Miles Franklin Prize, it was absolutely dominated disproportionately by male writers. So that was the origin story of those women banding together, and within a year, the Stella Prize was born. And this was about celebrating and honouring Australian women's and now non-binary fiction, poetry, non-fiction. And if you fast forward to now, we know that Leeli has just won for the incredible graphic novel Canon, as you just would have heard from Lee. This is the first graphic novel that's won the Stella. It's the first queer author, first trans author. Also, it's an incredible book. And since the Miles Franklin Prize has been won, 12 of the 14 books have been won by women since the Stella Prize was created. So it's really changed the Australian books landscape. And some figures suggest that the Stella Prize is now the prize that sells the most books of any Australian books prize out there. So I wanted to tell you that story just to give you an origin story of how the Stella Prize came about, but also to suggest to you that if you see something is wrong and you've got a whole lot of friends that agree with you, you can make something and do something about it as well. So this year I was one of the judges. It was a real pleasure and honour, and to be honest, a really big challenge to read roughly 250 books by Australian women and non-binary writers. And like I said before, this is poetry, this is fiction, this is non-fiction as well. I'm pretty sure I need to change my contact lens prescription now. In the end, the long list of the 12 books covered poetry, memoir, historical fiction, contemporary fiction, hybrids of academic research and creative non-fiction, and of course, one graphic novel. I'm just going to read you the long list because it's pretty cool, and I just want to give you a scope of what the Stella Prize encompasses. The long list was Contra by Eunice Andrade, poetry. The Rot by Evelyn Araluen, also poetry. Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks, that's non-fiction and memoir. Ankami by Deborah Dank, that's non-fiction. Fireweather by Miranda Darling, that's fiction. Apron Sorrow Sovereignty by Natalie Harkin, non-fiction. Canon by Lee Lai, graphic novel. Wild Duck Shore by Charlotte McConaughey, a novel, fiction. Wait Here by Lucy Nelson, short stories. Find Me at the Jaffa Gate, an encyclopedia of a Palestinian family by Michaela Sehar, it's non-fiction and memoir. 58 Facets, non-fiction, and I Am Nanit Garuk by Tasma Walton, fiction. And I have to apologise because originally we were going to I was going to interview Tasma Walton, who has written this incredible historical fiction book about her ancestors, about the violence that was enacted on her ancestors here on this continent we now know as Australia. But unfortunately, Tasma has some family issues that she needs to deal with, so she's in WA, so she sent her love. And then we were going to have Miranda Riwo, who is a former Stella Prize shortlistee, but she has got a stomach bug today. So now we've got Chris Neen, which is really, really cool because quite happily, Chris is a local Brisbane writer who has also been shortlisted for the Stella previously. Their work spans fiction, poetry, film, non-fiction. Their work is beloved here and beyond, shortlisted and won so many awards, including the Thomas Shapcott Poetry Prize. And in 2018, the Stella Prize shortlisted Chris's book, An Uncertain Grace, for the prize. And their memoir, Fat Girl Dancing, was shortlisted for the major state prizes in Queensland, Victoria, South Australia. And their new book, Rites of Spring, will be out in July. They're also a filmmaker, an artist, and a teacher. Can you please join me in welcoming Christine, everyone?
Thanks, Benjamin.
Okay, Chris, we're going to be talking about writing. We're going to be talking about books. We're going to be talking about reading as well. I'm really keen to go back in time into your childhood because I think a lot of us build our relationships with reading and writing quite early, right? What are your earliest memories of books?
Look, I love books. I've always loved books my whole life. But the thing that really made me a really avid reader was that I was raised by my grandmother, who's Slovenian, and she used to give me $1 for every book that I finished and could write a book review for her. So I was like this little toddler reading these kind of picture books and having to write a review to get this pocket money. And so it really made me read intentionally and for cash. So suddenly this kind of idea that books and money would go together was stuck in my head, that I could maybe make a living out of this.
We should also point out that $1 back then was worth a lot more than $1 is now, right?
It probably wasn't $1. It was probably like 50 cents or something. But still, it was, it was well worth persevering and actually really carefully reading. Because if I didn't get the review right, I wouldn't get the money as well. It had to be a good review.
What sort of books were you reading?
Oh, stuff about mice with swords. And then I graduated to people with swords. I was a real science fiction lover when I was younger and read science fiction fantasy the whole time.
Now, we know each other. We're mates up here on stage. But I also know as part of your childhood that you would be gifted books by your family, by your grandmother, your auntie, your mother. And often, if the book had some controversial, naughty adult parts in it, they would actually not just cross them out, they'd do something else.
Yeah, look, I would get a book for my birthday and there'd be pages cut out or paragraphs cut out of the book because there was sex in that paragraph. And my grandmother, who raised me, did not want any kind of mention of sex in a book. And so I would get these books that would be, the narrative, it would be like, some star battle on a far planet, and then suddenly there's this blank bit because the characters are having sex. And so, of course, for me, my mind wrote into those blank pages.
That's how you became the writer you are.
That became the most important thing about the book. The missing sex was the most important thing about all of the books that I had to read, and it became my obsession. And I then, my sister snuck books out of the library from the older section for kids and gave them to me, which would have sex scenes in them. So I would, like, with my torch, read these sex scenes and kind of realise what I was missing out on in my daily life.
So censorship is a powerful thing for a young mind.
Not in the way they expected
not in
it.
the way that's intended. But I guess there's a moral of the story there, which is like if you try to block, especially young people, from information or from stories, they're going to find a way to them. And your way, it sounds like, was writing them, if in your head and later on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it came. My whole kind of trajectory with books was that I started writing in grade 6, which is probably at around about 11 or 10, and I started writing novels, and I'd spend every single lunch and recess time writing these books, mainly because I wasn't really kind of close to the people at school. I was a bit of a freak, and so my way to keep myself busy was to write these books on my break. And I just loved it. I loved these worlds that I was creating. I loved the characters. They became my friends. I was really into the idea of writing these books, which, of course, included sex scenes.
You were the naughty kid. I'm interested, like you, when I introduced you before, I pointed out the fact that you're an author, but you're also a filmmaker. I know that you love watching films, and you paint as well. What does reading give you that the other forms don't? Like, what is it? Because I've been to your place, and if you go to Chris's apartment, like, the walls are books. Like, every wall is a bookshelf. And not just every wall is a bookshelf, but they're 2 books deep.
3 in some places.
3 books deep. Okay, don't brag. But yeah, you've got a lot of books, so you've got a really intense relationship with reading. What is it about reading, do you think, that, I don't know, activates something in you?
Look, it's pretty similar across the art forms, to be honest. Like, I feel like I get a similar thing from reading that I do from watching films, and going to an art gallery and really engaging with the artwork also does a similar thing. It unlocks a different part of my brain and makes me think about things in really different ways. And I was talking to Lee Lai yesterday about how graphic novels were so important to me as a young adult and as an adult, because the way that they're told is not the way a book would write it. It's like you can jump from idea to idea with just a gesture from frame to frame. And so for me, it was, it was the idea of finding new ways of telling things. And every author has a new way of writing a book, and every voice is different. And so I was absolutely obsessed with reading lots and lots of different voices so that I could know what I was attracted to in a book, what voice pulled me in and what voice I wanted to use. And the only way to do that, you can't be what you can't see, is a really important phrase for me in my entire life. And I couldn't be a writer unless I could see writers that I respected and admired and went, oh, I'd like to do that. I'd like to do that better than they did it.
And what kind of writers are we talking about? What kind of writers and what kind of work were they writing?
Look, it's quite wide. So, I'm attracted to anything from the science fiction writer Ray Bradbury, who was fundamental to my wanting to be a writer, to Jim Crace, who's a literary fiction writer, to my friends are all writers now. So, Mirandi, who would have been here up on the stage, I absolutely adore her novels as well. Laura Jean Mackay, who's a great Australian fiction writer. I really am very voracious, and I read across genres.
Is there anything that you avoid?
I do avoid, everyone hates me saying this, but I do avoid romance, and the reason that I avoid romance...
But it's so good sometimes, Chris.
Well, I suppose my mind goes to the darker interpersonal relationships, and it doesn't feel right that people sort of end up happy ever after together, because that's not how life works. Sorry, kids, but it's even if you find someone to settle down with, it's going to be a ride.
Isn't that the comfort of reading romance? So at least we can feel that it might be
but
like
it's a lie. It's a lie.
Okay, so Chris is now going to be ushered off stage. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's interesting, like, to hear that you read so widely as well. Because you read so widely and you write so widely across genres, is there a chord connecting what you think makes good writing?
There's I think that everyone's good writing is different. So I think that what I read and what I think is good writing is going to be different from what you read and find as good writing. For me, I'm really attracted to people that are experimenting with form. So I really like the idea that people don't just tell a straight story, that there's some sideways, creeping way of getting into the story that kind of tricks you. I like stories that use poetry in the narrative. I like fiction books that use sort of non-fiction as a way in. So I really like people to experiment a bit with the way it's told. And if I see something new, I get this kind of excitement, this buzz. If I read something and I go, wow, I've never seen that before, it really energizes me.
I'm so keen to hear about your writing process because when I asked before, so many of you put up your hands because you're interested in writing, and I imagine you're writing already, obviously as part of like your schoolwork, but I imagine some of you are writing in your own time for your own pleasure, right? Because you want to put these stories out there into the world, or maybe you're writing for yourself. Every writer has a different process, and I'm always astounded by how vastly different writers work. Some writers find it really pleasurable. Some writers find it torturous. I'm keen to hear, like, when you're facing a blank page, what happens next? Are you facing a blank page, or are you starting somewhere else?
Look, writing can be really torturous. Like, I don't find it pleasurable all the time when you're really wanting to get into the heart of a story and it's not working. It feels just terrible. It feels like there's something wrong with you, that you can't grab the story. But I try really hard to find ways of not facing a blank page by writing in public. So I often write in cafes because there's always noise and there's always people around, and those kind of conversations and those people find their way into what I'm writing. So if there's nothing in my head, I look around me and find what's going on around me and
We're
try
so
and
different.
describe
I
that.
need like a Buddhist temple of silence around me.
I know. A
Yeah.
lot of other writer friends that I know just need this complete kind of quiet. And I often work at the State Library of Queensland, which has this room which is complete quiet. But when I go in there, I just feel blank. I feel like I can't think. So I go down to the cafe where it's noisy and people are kind of yelling at each other.
You need movement.
I need movement, I need life, or I need to go and look at art for a while and kind of let the visual art sink into my brain and inspire what I'm writing.
Because it clicks something else off in your brain about story. Because if we're looking at art, for instance, a lot of art represents story,
Yep.
and we can get a story out of that. Is it almost like, I don't know, like I find this about, say, something very different, like swimming. When I swim, a different part of my brain switches off and then something else is activated and I
Yeah.
can piece together a story. Is that what's happening for you with
I
art?
think it is. I think art kind of triggers a different part of your brain to work, and then that kind of is a way that you can sneak into the writing. So instead of sneaking in from, I'm going to write this story, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, it's like I just look at the picture and I think, oh, blue, maybe this story needs more blue. And then I write into the blue of the story. It sounds a little bit kind of witchy, but if you kind of try and write blue, it will be about the mood, it'll be about the voice, it'll be about the tone of what you're writing, and it just is a different way in to sitting down and staring and trying to just tell the story from A to Z.
That's so interesting because when you talk to musicians, for instance, like a lot of musicians have a condition called synesthesia, where they can see the notes as colours. Like Cynthia Erivo from Wicked has this, Fiona Apple has this as well. Each note is a different colour. I've never thought about writing the vibe of a colour into your work, but that's what you're talking about there. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a hard concept if it doesn't come naturally to you. But I do teach writing, and I teach my students to use other things. So taste and touch and sound are another way into the work. And so kind of triggering taste by giving people, cookies or sweets or savoury things can trigger a different way of working. It's really interesting how those different senses you can force them into a kind of synesthesia, even if you don't have that as a natural kind of way of living.
When we were listening to Leela talk about her process before and how you look back and you learn lessons from your work, and then you can take for granted and then go off and use those lessons in your next work. What have the big lessons been for you that you've discovered along the way? Because you've been writing for decades, plural now, as have I. And over that time, the writers that we once were aren't the writers we are now. We've learnt more, sometimes painfully. We've got more tools in our toolkit. We know how to use them. What are the things that you know now about writing that you didn't know when you started out?
A couple of really important things. One of them is that your first draft is going to be terrible, so don't try and write a great first draft.
Oh, your second draft will be terrible.
Yeah, your second
and
draft
your
will
third,
and
your fourth.
They'll probably be terrible for a while, but the fact is that I know a lot of people who never get to the end of their novel because they want it to be perfect, and so they just keep going back and trying to make all the sentences perfect. But you might cut that scene, so you've just wasted hours and hours of your time. So getting through a full draft and just writing a full draft, and it's going to be awful and messy, and that's fine, is actually the only way to the end of the book. That's the most important thing. The other really important thing, I've got this tagged above my workspace at home. It says, every story is a ghost story. I just wrote that on a Post-it note.
Wait a minute, let's unpack that a bit. We love a ghost story.
We
That's
do.
often fun. And sometimes ghost stories can be romantic
Yeah.
as well. What do you mean about every story is a ghost story? And what has that activated in your writing?
Well, it came to me when I was writing a book that wasn't working.
Right.
And it was really flat, and I just didn't know what was missing, and my subconscious just told me that it was missing ghosts, and then I just didn't know what that meant, and then over the years I've kind of realised that there's someone who is a ghost-like figure underneath everything you're writing. So even if you're writing a memoir, for instance, and I do write a lot of memoir, it's like, who's the person that's ghosting behind this scene? Who is the person that's not in the scene but's influencing it? And that's the same in a novel too. It's like, what is the thing that's missing? What's the thing that's hiding behind the scene?
So it doesn't have to always be a literal ghost.
No.
It can be your crush who ghosted you.
That's correct. Yeah, yes, it can be.
Yeah.
You can be having a scene between two people, has nothing to do with an ex-partner, but the whole scene is about this relationship with the ex-partner.
Because that scene is haunted by that person who's not there.
The scene is haunted. There's always, to make something better, you need to haunt it with something.
Okay.
So you try and work out what is the thing that's haunting this scene.
Can you give us some more commandments for good writing, like thou shalt not?
It's really good if you sit at the desk and write. I know that's...
As opposed to what? You just said you're at a cafe.
Well, it can be, the desk can be a cafe.
Sure, okay.
As opposed to somebody calls you and says, hey, do you want to go and have a coffee? And you go, yeah, I'd love to go and have a coffee. If someone calls me on a day that I'm supposed to be writing and says, would you like to go and have a coffee? I have to say no.
It's hard though, isn't it?
It's
because
really
writing's hard and going out to coffee with a mate is a much better option.
Much better. I'd much prefer to be going out with a friend.
Okay, so what's the rule? Thou shalt not go to coffee?
Well, thou shalt sit at the desk.
Shall sit at the desk. It reminds me of a mutual friend of ours, Linda Javen, who's another amazing writer. And when I first moved to Sydney and I invited Linda to lunch, she says, I don't do lunch. It interrupts the day. I meet people for breakfast or I meet them after work because writing's work. And I wouldn't take a long lunch break if I was at at another job. So meet me for breakfast or meet me at the end of the day, but not for lunch.
That's really smart, and that's why she's written all those books.
She's written a lot of books.
Yeah.
Okay, so thou shalt work at the desk.
Yep.
What else?
What's another thing? Work can be modular.
What does that mean?
So if you're writing something, you don't have to write it from the beginning to the end. You can write it in chunks, and you can move those chunks around. Particularly in memoir, I have to admit it's a much more useful technique for memoir than fiction, although it can work for fiction too. If you write these, you imagine that you're making a box of Lego pieces. You're making the pieces from scratch. Each of your kind of little Word documents or your little things in Scrivener is a Lego piece. And don't fit them together so that they can't be taken apart right from the beginning, because that locks you into thinking about your book in one particular way. The book is modular. You can take it apart. You can take all the bricks apart. You can change the colours. and that way you can move things around and make it more fluid and better.
Yeah. I mean, when you say that, I think of Leela's canon, which starts with a flash forward, right? Like it's not linear. And then the bulk of the story goes back in time and we find out how we got to that point where someone has destroyed a kitchen. So it's like there are so many different ways to tell the story. So when we go into like a Google Doc or a Word doc or whatever it is, it just presents us with this endless scroll. And it's like, oh no, I have to go back to the beginning. But like
No.
you, I've discovered that
Little pieces.
I write in little chunks, and then you get to plagiarize yourself
That's correct.
because
And-
you've already written the stuff.
And one really, really cool thing about writing in little chunks is that if you move two things next to each other, some weird new thing emerges over the top. So if you have two scenes that are completely different, you put them next to each other, they don't seem to be anything to do with each other, but because we as readers try and see patterns in everything, you're trying to see what is connecting these two scenes. And so you're making this third place. It's like, what's the word for it, that when you play a note, there's a resonance that just kind of, if something kind of resonates in the room on the same, a similar note.
You're talking about a ghost.
Yeah, it's a ghost. So there is a ghost that happens when you put things next to each other, but the reader makes it as well. That's another rule, is that don't try and do all the work for your reader. So if you're trying to fill in all the gaps, there's nothing for your reader to do except just like passively read, and that's boring as anything. It's better that they are an active reader who's involved in storytelling. So if you leave lots of space for them to fill with their mind, you're actually in a conversation with the reader.
Yeah. I like those rules. So show up at the desk, work at the desk, which is another way of saying no to coffee dates. And the other thing is, like, your work can be modular as well. You can work in little chunks. You don't have to start at the start. Sometimes I love writing the finale because I'm really excited about writing the final scene of whatever I'm working on, a book or a play or something, or a screenplay. And I'm like, now that I've got the finale, that makes me excited about going back and working at the start. Chris, you also mentioned that you write memoir, and you write memoir beautifully. Your first memoir was called Affection. Your latest memoir is Fat Girl Dancing. And as I mentioned in the intro when I was introducing Chris, Fat Girl Dancing is so incredible that awards across the country put it on the shortlist because it's a really remarkable story about the body. And I'm really keen to hear, just generally, before we get more into Fat Girl Dancing specifically, what is joyous and hard about writing fiction versus what is joyous and hard about writing memoir, which is non-fiction about your life?
Writing fiction is difficult because you have to make, you're not starting with anything, you're making everything up. So there's too many choices, and so sometimes it can be so confusing because you can go anywhere, and that makes it difficult for you.
Is that also the joy, that you can make it up and go anywhere?
It can be, but it's also one of the hardest bits of it. In that you really could, you could kill your character, you could make your character live, you can make them fall in love. You have to make that decision. So you have to back yourself on whatever decision you make and hope that it's the best one. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. But writing memoir is difficult for a lot of reasons. One of them is the people in your life. Your relationships with people around you are going to be affected by the memoir that you've written if you write about them in your book. And even if you don't, they're like, why didn't you write about me? So your relationships are really something that have to be navigated.
And you do have to write about other people in a memoir, because unless you've lived in a cave as a hermit,
Which would be a good memoir,
life,
actually.
which would be a really
Yeah.
very minimalist memoir. But
Short, but
unless you've just
interesting.
lived on your own the entire time, you will end up writing about other people, because
That's
that's what
correct.
forms a life.
Yeah, that's right. And often your family, because you can pretend, you can change names of other people in your life, but you can change your mum's name, but they're still your mum, and everyone's going to know who they are.
So what I hear is, if you're going to write from your real life, you're going to write a memoir, or even if you write a personal essay, there's the risk of offending or hurting someone.
Yeah, particularly your family. That's right. Correct.
Right.
And you have to live with that. You have to kind of make your peace with that. But I do try really hard to be nice to all the characters, even the horrible people in my life.
Uh-huh.
I try and see the nice parts of them.
You don't want to get revenge on them?
Sometimes it's tempting, I tell you. But no, I don't think that's really interesting. I think revenge memoirs are not really interesting. I actually find it more interesting to see someone who's behaved terribly to you and try and work out why they've done it, because they weren't born bad. They always have a reason for why they behave the way they behave. So I think that's much more interesting, is to work out why that horrible person was horrible, and maybe as a byproduct you kind of make your peace with that person as well in the real world. So that's, yeah, I mean, that's hard. And also, you're on the page and people think that they know you because they've read your memoir. They only know one bit of you, the bit that you've shown, but people will think that that's all of you and that they now know everything about you because they've read your memoir. So that's really tricky as well.
Maybe that's the success of a memoir, that you've given them the impression that
It's
they know
true.
everything, but
It's
you've
true.
actually...
That you're a serial killer.
You're actually a serial killer.
You didn't put that in your memoir.
Okay, well, that is not what you wrote about in
No,
Fat Girl
that's
Dancing,
great.
actually.
Yep.
You wrote beautifully about the complicated relationship with your body over time. Tell us about why you started writing it, and tell us the story of the story as well, because, you know, this will be a new story and a new book for all of us here.
I said about, because I'd been writing books, you know, this was my 9th book, so I'd been writing books for a long time, and I'd never come out as fat, which is really interesting.
What do you mean by that?
Well, look, I've come out as queer, I've come out as trans, I've come out as a lot of things, but in all of my books, I never had acknowledged the fact that I live in a fat body, and I'm really honest about that now. My body, you know, you can't miss it. I stand there and people can see what your body shape is, but I never talked about it. I never spoke about it. And you know how when you say, "Oh, I'm fat," people go, "Oh, no, you're not." And it's like, you know, it's like, no, I'm sorry, but I understand how physics works. And
I imagine there'd be other people who are like have the word fat labelled on them, and it would be really hurtful and painful.
Absolutely.
So has your relationship with the word changed over time?
Yeah, it has. It has. The kind of idea that I can reclaim that word and say, "This is me," has been really useful. It's part of the whole coming out thing, because you know, it's a fact of life. This is the body I live with, and it affects every single day of my life in lots of different ways. And people who don't live in a fat body don't know how that affects them. Even, you know, not just the bullying, not just the kind of interactions with other people, but, you know, the simple thing of going into a shop with narrow shelves, trying to shop at a real shop rather than having to go online into specialist stores that are 4 times the price. You know, these things, even exercise gear, they don't make exercise gear for fat people in general. They do now a little bit more than when I started writing this in 2020. But
you're describing a world that's not made for you, a world that's hostile to you, actually.
Yeah, and it takes a toll. So anybody who's, you know, a little bit oversized or in a different shape, size, abled body will know that the world is not necessarily made for them. You know, it's just, you know, airplane seats are not made for someone with my body. General seats sometimes are not made for someone with my body. So, you know, I wanted to be honest about that. And so when I started writing this book, I called it Fat Girl Dancing because, well, I didn't call it that till the end, but I wanted it to talk about me in my specific body at this time in my life. At the time I thought I was a woman, so an older woman who is fat is what I started writing about. The process of writing this book made me question the idea of woman in the first place, and so that kind of got thrown out in the first chapter pretty much. But it also led me down these paths into being really looking at my body as an artist would. So I used to do, you know, classes where I'd be painting artist models. I wanted to look at myself in that way, in the way that you're not judging, you're just kind of going, this is actually the fact of a body, and what is this body, and what are the positives and what are the negatives, and to be honest about those things.
You keep going back to this idea of like you wanting to be honest, you're striving towards honesty. Why and for who?
For me, I suppose, is I wanted to be honest because I knew that there weren't many of these stories around at the time. Since this book has come out, there have been a few other people who've written memoirs of fatness, and that has opened up a lot of conversations around that area. But then we've moved back, you know, with the introduction of the Wegovy and all those kind of drugs. we've kind of moved backwards again in terms of people going back into the closet because they can just be on these injectables, which are way too expensive for many people and also not suitable for many people. And then we now are moving away from the idea of body inclusivity. So that is a part of the conversation that is now emerging. But when I was writing this book, that wasn't a part of the conversation, and I just really wanted to kind of look at the reality of living in different bodies and the fact that people don't kind of realize how impactful it is to live in a particular body. If you live in a body that actually fits the model, the standard model, you slide through life really easily. But if you don't, there are all these barriers and you're constantly getting bruised by the world, and I wanted to show that in a book.
I imagine a lot of people listening to you are thinking, that sounds like a really interesting book that I'd like to read. I've read the book. It's an incredible book. Could you read from the book and give us an idea of, what's happening in the book at this stage? Give us some context about what you're going to read.
Yeah, so I didn't want to just talk about the ways the world is bad for my body. I wanted to talk about how my body works in a positive way as well. And so I talked about a trip that I took to Vanuatu, where I was on an island, Tanna, and the locals had told me that there was a dugong that was in the ocean and that he was a male and that his partner had been killed, which was sad. And he was grieving his partner, but that he was aggressive towards men and often quite friendly towards women. And so we went swimming, and this was about my encounter with the dugong. So I'll read from there. We went swimming in the bay. The water was so clear that even at its deepest part you could see down to the sandy floor. We said hello to a group of Scandinavian tourists sunbaking and paddling in the shallows. Me feeling self-conscious, as always, in my swimming costume, which was black with legs down to my knees. I slipped into the water quickly to hide myself and swam out into the water as warm as blood. The sun settled on my skin. Anthony bobbed around me. This was a true holiday. This felt like the first time I'd been able to relax in years. The dugong was not there, and then suddenly he was. The Scandinavian backpackers all stood on the rocks and giggled and pointed, and then I turned around, and he was there. He was longer than I was tall and bigger across than the circumference of my own bulky body. Anthony nervously swam back a few strokes towards the shore. The dugong came closer to me and turned on his side. I reached out, nervous but fascinated. I touched his belly, soft and tight as a snake. My heart was beating too fast, and I tried to calm it. I stroked his belly, and he slowly drifted closer to me. I had never been this close to such a large wild animal before. Anthony nervously called out to me to come a bit closer to shore. I swam back a few feet, and the dugong followed me. The tourists had reached for their cameras. I could hear the click of the shutters as they took photos of me swimming with the creature. I reached out to touch the top of the dugong's head, and it was covered in barnacles. I quickly took my fingers away. You could cut yourself from touching his head, or his back, which looked like a floating rock, crusted over with mussels and barnacles and oyster shells. The dugong put his flippers on either side of my chest and gently moved away from the shore, dragging me along with him. Anthony laughed. He likes you. I turned around and grinned at him. I think I'm basically his dugong bride. It was funny and wonderful and terrifying. I let the creature gentle me away from shore for a while and then lost my nerve and tried to turn towards shore. He pushed back. His flippers felt like a firm hug. I giggled nervously. Anthony slapped the surface of the water behind me. The dugong let go and backed off, giving me a moment to stroke quietly towards the shore. In a few seconds, he had floated towards me, putting those flippers around me insistently, taking me out again. I caressed his chest, so soft and yet powerful. What if I let him take me? How far would we go? I relaxed into this gentle cradling, the power in those flippers, the beautiful ugliness of the beast. He stretched out in the water beside me exactly like a lover would. I laughed when he pressed against my chest more firmly and wiggled his body, edging me further out to sea. You might see him if you're lucky. I considered myself lucky at that moment, but I was also a little afraid. Once more, I pushed the creature away from my body cautiously. Once more, he let me go again. Anthony smacked the surface of the water again, and he backed off, But as I made my way back towards the gentle incline of the rocks, he followed me. When I hesitated, turning back towards him, he pulled me close again. My body is buoyant. I have no fear of drowning. I tried to relax and let him take me further out into the perfect green of the ocean. For a moment, in his arms, I felt strangely safe. I think you'd better come in now. Anthony smacked the water harder, and again the dugong backed off. My body was read differently in this island nation. Everything I knew about beauty could be thrown out, reassessed, picked apart, and knitted back together in a new and strange way. I bobbed gently back to the cliff face and climbed up it, grinning, knowing the creature had identified me as something like itself, a great, blubbery thing of the ocean, and feeling for the first time exactly the right shape and size.
There's so much there, isn't there? There's kind of terror that you're about to be dragged into the sea and made a dugong's wife. But there's also like beauty and acceptance as well. Like, what a transformative experience. So that's your memoir, Fat Girl Dancing. We're going to throw it open to the audience soon. So if you've got questions, start thinking of them, because I'm going to open it up to everyone really, really soon. But I want to ask you just a couple more questions. We're here talking about the Stella, and you were shortlisted for the Stella in 2018 with An Uncertain Grace. What did that mean for you? What did that mean to you to get that kind of recognition?
It was actually probably one of the best moments of my life, to be honest. I had been shortlisted for other, state awards before, but the Stella was something different. It was bigger. It was national. My book was up there against every other book by a woman or non-binary person in the entire of Australia. So there was some kind of validation that my work was worth something, which it shouldn't be. Like, I really shouldn't have put that kind of power in the hands of a judging panel that's just made up of people like you.
Me, this guy, this rando.
Like, who cares what you like and what
Who
you don't
cares?
like? But it does mean something. Like, it does mean something. It also gives you a certain national profile that I didn't have before. I mean, my books have always been a little bit weird and a little bit left of centre. And so even though they'd gotten really great reviews in papers, they'd been shortlisted for national awards, there were still people who were like, I don't really know what to make of this. They're odd, they're sort of left of centre, they're strange books. And then when I got this kind of Stella nod, it kind of mainstreamed my work a little bit, where people who would never have picked it up and went, oh, I get it now, that this is what you're doing, and went back and read my other books as well. So it actually kind of changed the way I was seen in the literary landscape, and in a way it changed how I saw myself, because I'm always, similar to what Lee was saying before, I'm always kind of, I'm my worst enemy in terms of critiques. Like, I'm the person who's harshest on my own work. So even if I finish a book, I'm like, yeah, sure, I wrote this book, it's fine, but I can see all the problems. I can see the things that I want to fix. And the reason that I have that in me is so that I can write a better book next time. It's like, I'm the person who can see what's wrong with my own books. Other people might be fooled into thinking that they're perfect, but I'm not. And so next time I'm going to write a better book. And it kind of really spurs me forward to try and be excellent with every new book. So I'm glad that I have that, but it's also pretty hard to live with that voice in my head that's telling me that I'm terrible all the time. So this Stella thing just lifted a little bit of that voice, the critique. It kind of made me go, actually, people like this, and not just my weird kind of weirdo readers like it. Mainstream readers actually like this as well.
I think it's really healthy to hear that, award-winning writers and award-winning illustrators as well, like, we all wrestle with self-doubt and incredible amounts of self-critique. That stuff those feelings that we probably had as teenagers when we started out writing, they don't go away. But I think, what do you think? Like, we learn better how to manage them, or?
What I'd learn is that each book goes through the same process. So I'm just about to release my 10th published novel, and after 10 books, I can now go, oh, at this point in the writing process, the book is terrible. You feel like you want to throw it away, you feel like you want to chuck it out and never go back to it again. And I know now that I've overcome that 10 times before. So I get to that point and I'm like, oh, actually, I've learnt this. I just have to push through and I have to get to that bad first draft. So that's, you learn things about your process that keep you going. And you also learn that you're always going to be your worst critic as well. So in a way, my brain writes the worst possible criticism of my book so that if there's ever a bad review, it can't be as bad as what I've said about myself. So it's kind of like a protection device as well, I
You've
suppose.
vaccinated yourself
I've
against bad
vaccinated
reviews.
myself
Yeah, okay.
against bad reviews by doing them in my own head. So in a way, that's actually kind of healthy because it means that nobody else can kind of punch you as hard as you can punch yourself.
What I also hear there is it's almost like, being an endurance athlete. Like, I'm sure that's not a pleasurable experience either. But if you've done your 10 marathons, which a book is, it's a marathon, and it's like, oh, it's going to be painful. This is familiar pain. But you know what? Intellectually, I know that I've done it. You just have to keep doing the work, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, you mentioned that your 10th book is coming out soon in July. It's called Rite of Spring. What can you tell us about it?
It is a novel set on an island off Tasmania about a couple who go there with problems in their relationship. They have to look after a lighthouse and the island for 6 months without anyone else being there. So they take all their food for 6 months to the island. They're not going to see anyone else. They think this is the way they can repair their relationship, is to be completely alone together on the island. What could possibly go wrong? And of course, things do go wrong. And one of the things that goes wrong is that the woman in the relationship starts to see somebody else on the island with them.
Of course, it's a ghost story.
It is a ghost story, but it's not really a ghost story. But is this person real, or is this person a figment of her imagination? Who is this person? Is it someone who means them harm, as her husband thinks? Or is it someone who doesn't mean them harm? Like, what is this person? So that it's a kind of a weird, slightly sea creature-y kind of book.
Oh, okay, the dugong's back.
The dugong is back.
Okay, so it's a ghost story in some ways. We need to read it to figure out what's actually happening. Is it a romance?
Look,
You love the genre.
I actually think that there is. I thought that there was a romance at one point, and then a whole bunch of my friends read it and went, no, this is not a romance. But it's more a romance with your own self. It's about, it's a book about finding yourself and learning to kind of be okay with who you are. So in a way, it's a romance with yourself.
Okay. We're going to throw it open to the audience now, but just before we do, you've written 10 books now, as you've said. A lot of them are decidedly adult, and maybe you'll have an adult cutting out those pages, just like the adults in your life cut out pages on your books when you were a kid. What's the most age-appropriate book for high schoolers, do you think?
Look, I do think Fat Girl Dancing would be appropriate because everybody, and when I was at high school, I also felt like my body didn't fit. And I think that that's a stage that we all go through where we feel that we're ugly, where we feel that we don't fit, where we feel that we need to change ourselves to fit into the world, rather than changing the world to let us fit into it, which is actually what we should be doing. And I think, so I think Fat Girl Dancing is probably the best book, age-appropriate book for people. There's a teeny bit of sex in it. Not that much. You just cut that chapter out.
Yeah, you're all mature enough. You know how to manage it. You don't need to cut it out yourself. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience. We're not going to pass a mic around. I'm just going to ask you to use a loud voice. I'm going to be able to hear you, and I'll repeat the question back so everyone else can hear. Who's got a question? Was there a question here? No, there was just a gentle wave. Hello, at the back. Absolutely. So how did you go about portraying people in your life that you care about, that you might also have issues, and how do you kind of like reconcile their potential reactions in the real world?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, I try and be kind. I think my overarching thing is always be kind to everybody. So that's my first port of call, is if there's someone that you don't like that you're writing about, make sure you're kind to them. I have a very difficult aunt who appears quite a lot in my books, and I can tell you that she's a lot worse to be in a room with than she is on the pages of my book. So, I'm always trying to find the way into her life through her life experience and why she behaves the way she does. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is it did kind of compromise my relationship with my grandmother and with my aunt, particularly because I wrote about sexuality a bit in my books and they didn't want me to write about that. So it became basically they don't acknowledge that I'm a writer, even though that's the most important thing in my life. My grandmother's dead now, but my aunt and my mother, who is alive but is sort of not the main force in my life, they just don't acknowledge that I'm a writer. They don't tell, anyone who comes to visit them, they don't tell them that I'm a writer. They don't mention it. We just pretend that I'm not a writer, which is quite painful because I watch lovely Benjamin here have his book launches and his family are there taking photographs and being really
too many
photographs and being really excited, but my family have never been at my book launches, and that is a sad thing. My father, who I did not grow up with, comes to everything that I do. I met him as an adult and have a very adult and lovely friendly relationship with, and that's wonderful, but my maternal family that I grew up with just don't acknowledge it.
Thank God for Barry, the dad. But it also sounds, what I hear there is that there is a cost, and sometimes you can't even anticipate what that cost is, but there often is a cost, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to pay the fee.
Yeah. And also, sometimes you think someone's going to have a problem with being in the book, and they don't, surprisingly. So my first book, Affection, I didn't know how that would go because it's my first book, and I was writing about an ex-lover and the relationships that we had together, and I thought, if he hears about this, we're going to, maybe he would sue me, and because I didn't know where he was or how to track him down. I changed his name. He tracked me down, and he was like, you forgot this scene and you forgot this bit and you should have written this bit. And I was just like, he just wanted more. Like, okay, that's fine. So some people are actually really happy that you've written about them. I'm always surprised by people's reactions.
It's true, isn't it? You can't actually anticipate how people are going to react until they've reacted to it.
Yeah, and then it's too late. So it's dicey. But if you want to write that book, then that's the price you have to pay.
Yeah. Thanks so much. That's a great question. Another question over here. So with fiction, when we read it on the page, like there's the beginning, there's the middle, and the end. Do you have all of that planned out from the start? Do you have a planning process in terms of how you actually figure that out?
No, I'm really, really chaotic, and sometimes that's a real problem. If Mirandy had been sitting on the stage like she was intending to, she basically plans the whole thing out.
She's organised
on a whiteboard before she even puts pen to paper. And like I look at that and I just think, you could murder someone quite easily because you'd know where all the gaps are and how to cover it up. I'm terrible. I could not do a murder because I would be caught so quickly because I'm chaotic. The only thing that I do have is I sometimes have some scenes that I know that I'm going to write, and I use index cards. I use coloured index cards. I write what those scenes are, and I pin them to the wall. And so I've got all these kind of gaps, but I've got these few index cards that I know I'm going to hit, and then I write those, and then I just let my subconscious do the work for me, work out what scenes I need to write next. So you come to a project thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to write. I don't know what to write. But then as you start to remember things, you just write down what you remember, and one memory leads to another memory, and your subconscious is actually doing the work of putting the things that you need on the page for you. So I like to trust that my brain knows what it's doing, even if it seems crazy.
That does sound pretty organised, actually. It sounds to me like you've got some anchor points and you're trusting your brain to do the rest of the work. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yep. Thanks so much for your question. That's a great question. We've got time for one more. So there are a lot of ways to get ideas. How do you get ideas for your plot and the worlds that you're building for your fiction?
Well, really interestingly, this one that was shortlisted for the Stella gives a really good example of that. I'd written 2 books in 1 year, like I'd toggled between a collection of poetry and a novel in 1 year, and it just broke my brain, and I didn't think I could ever write anything again. So I decided that I'd give myself a year off, and all I'd do would be to read. And I love reading New Scientist magazine. I love the science, little kind of science information. I love it. It inspires me. So I was reading lots and lots and lots of science things, and every time I'd read something, I'd be like, oh, that gives me this idea, and I'd write something about that idea in a little notebook. And at the end of that year, I had enough little bits of ideas to pin them all together to make a novel. And I was like, they're all kind of about science, so maybe there's this person who's a scientist who goes through all these different experiments, and then I linked it all together, and it became this book. It was just like the book accidentally got written when I was trying not to write. So the ideas all came from New Scientist magazine, so everything in this book is a real science idea. And it was just what those science articles did to my brain, I suppose.
So one, you tricked yourself.
I tricked myself.
You gaslit yourself.
Yep, correct.
And the second thing is you leaned into your obsessions.
Yeah. Oh, and I do have those. Look, my family has autism, and I have those traits as well. So I get like really, really, really fixated on particular obsessional things. Jellyfish were a big component of this, and before that I was really interested in octopuses, and so I did a deep dive into octopuses, and they came into another book that I was writing. I'm doing mushrooms at the moment. I'm absolutely obsessed by mushrooms, and so the book that I'm writing is all about mushrooms and, what collective consciousness could be if we all took magic mushrooms. It's like my obsessions just fuel everything. So if you have a passion, just lean into that, because it makes it more fun. Writing is really hard and not fun, and the only way it can be fun is if you're doing the research in something you love.
Yeah, that's a really great place to leave it, because if you're going to be interested in the work, your reader's going to be interested in the work as well. They'll be able to tell. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Stella Schools program. You all have book packs and freebies as you go on the way out. So we're close to the Ekka Showgrounds. It's basically the Ekka. You all got a show bag on the way out. Thank you so much for being such a great audience. Could you please join me in thanking Christine, everyone? Thank you so much. Happy reading, happy writing.